The cowboy saved the desert princess. Now Apache law says she belongs to him alone. The sun was blazing over the endless desert, turning the sand into waves of golden light. The wind blew fiercely, carrying tiny particles that stung the skin and made breathing difficult. In the midst of this harsh landscape, a young woman moved carefully, her long hair tied back and her clothes wrapped tightly around her to protect herself from the heat and dust. She was known by many as the Desert Princess, not because she was royal, but because of the grace and courage she showed in the most difficult conditions. Her people had taught her how to survive in this desert, how to read the clouds for storms, how to find water where none seemed to exist, and how to stay strong when the world seemed against her. That morning she had set out alone, carrying a small pack of supplies and a leather-bound journal where she wrote down observations about the desert, its animals, and its hidden plants. She loved exploring, even if it was dangerous, because the desert had a beauty that could not be seen anywhere else. The sky was a sharp blue, and she could see the distant mountains shimmering in the heat waves. But suddenly the wind picked up, stronger than before. A sandstorm was forming, moving fast, and there was no place nearby to take shelter. She tried to turn back, but the storm was already surrounding her, swirling sand in all directions. Her eyes stung, and the dust made it hard to breathe. Every step became difficult, and she realized quickly that staying in one place was dangerous. From a ridge nearby, a man watched. He was a cowboy, strong and experienced, with skin tanned by years under the sun. He had a wide-brimmed hat, a worn leather jacket, and boots that had seen many miles of rough terrain. He was used to the desert, knew its dangers, and had always respected its power. He had been riding his horse along a trail, checking water sources and making sure the land was safe for travelers. That's when he noticed the cloud of sand and the figure struggling within it. His instincts kicked in immediately. He could see her struggling, her small figure almost lost in the white blur of the storm. Without a second thought, he urged his horse forward, shouting as loud as he could over the howling wind, even though he knew she might not hear him. The cowboy reached her just as she stumbled and fell to her knees. The sand was thick in the air, making it hard to see, and the wind threatened to knock them both off their feet. But he was steady and strong. He grabbed her arm and pulled her close to him, shielding her from the worst of the storm with his body.
"Hold on!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the roar of the wind.
She looked up at him, eyes wide with fear and surprise. She had never seen anyone approach the desert like that, so calm and confident even in the chaos. His presence gave her hope. Together they moved, the cowboy leading the way through the thick clouds of sand, one careful step at a time. They reached a small rocky outcrop, a natural shelter just big enough to protect them from the worst of the storm. The cowboy helped her to sit down, brushing the sand from her hair and face. "You'll be safe here for now," he said, his voice calm but firm. She nodded, trying to catch her breath. She felt a strange mix of relief and awe. She had survived storms before, but never with someone so capable at her side. She noticed the lines of care on his face, the way his eyes scanned the desert even while he spoke to her. There was experience there, and something else, something gentle that made her feel she could trust him immediately. As the storm raged outside, they talked quietly, sharing small pieces of their lives. She learned that he had spent most of his life in the desert, traveling across its wide stretches, helping those in need, and always respecting the land and its rules. He told her about the animals he had encountered, the places where water could be found even in the driest months, and the lessons the desert had taught him about patience, courage, and respect. She shared her own story, how she had grown up learning to survive, how the desert had shaped her life, and how she loved the quiet beauty of it despite its dangers. Each story made the other listen more carefully, and a bond began to form, not because of words, but because of shared understanding and the mutual respect born in a moment of crisis. Hours passed, and the storm finally began to die down. The wind softened and the thick clouds of sand slowly lifted, revealing the desert once again. She looked around and realized how isolated they were. There were no signs of other travelers, no animals, just the endless sand and the distant mountains. But she also realized something else. Without him, she might not have survived. Gratitude welled up inside her, mixed with a strange feeling she could not yet name. He had risked his life to save a stranger in the desert, showing courage that went beyond mere duty. When the storm fully ended, the cowboy helped her stand and checked that she was unharmed. He offered her water from his canteen and made sure she had enough food for the journey back. "The desert can be unforgiving," he said, looking at her with seriousness. "You never know when it will turn on you. You need to be careful, and you need someone watching your back sometimes." She smiled faintly, feeling the weight of his words. She knew he was right, and yet there was a pride in her that would not let her admit how close she had come to danger. They began walking together toward a small village she called home, moving slowly at first, making sure she could manage the rocky paths and uneven sand. He stayed close, always watching, always ready. Along the way, she began to notice small things about him. The way he spoke to the animals, the way he seemed to know which rocks were safe to step on, the way he never acted impatient even when the journey was difficult. She realized that he was more than just brave, he was careful, kind, and completely trustworthy. By the time they reached the outskirts of her village, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sand. The sky turned pink and gold, and the desert seemed to breathe again after the storm. She turned to him, eyes wide with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. He shrugged, smiling a little. "Seeing you safe is enough," he replied. "That's all I need." But she could see it in his eyes. This was more than just a simple rescue. There was a seriousness, a sense of responsibility that he felt, even for someone he had just met. She didn't fully understand it yet, but she knew that their lives had changed in a single afternoon. A bond had been formed in the storm, and neither of them could ignore it. The desert had thrown them together, and now it had left its mark on both of their lives. As they approached the village gates, villagers came running, calling out to the desert princess. They had heard about the storm and feared the worst. When they saw her safe, accompanied by the cowboy, relief washed over them. Elders stepped forward, their faces serious but calm, noticing the man who had helped one of their own. Whispers spread among the people, talking about courage, about honor, and about the strange rules of the desert and its law. The cowboy quietly stepped back, letting the villagers tend to her. He didn't want to interfere, but watched carefully, making sure no harm came to her. She turned to him one last time before entering the village, her eyes full of gratitude and something more, a sense of trust that had formed in a matter of hours. He tipped his hat, nodded, and then began making his way back across the desert, ready to leave her in the hands of her people, but knowing that this encounter would change both of their lives forever. In the quiet that followed, the desert princess reflected on what had happened. She realized that survival was not just about strength and skill. Sometimes it was about connection, about meeting someone willing to risk everything to help another. And in the harsh, endless desert, that lesson was more valuable than water, more precious than shelter, and more rare than the softest breeze after a storm. She had survived, yes, but she had also found something she hadn't expected, a bond forged in courage, respect, and the unforgiving yet beautiful heart of the desert. After the storm, the village seemed calm, almost peaceful, but beneath the quiet surface, whispers were spreading quickly. The desert princess moved carefully through the sandy paths, brushing dust from her clothes, while the villagers hurried to offer her water, blankets, and food. They were relieved to see her safe, yet their eyes kept flicking to the cowboys standing a few steps away. He had saved her life, yes, but in their culture, every action carried meaning, and this one was no different. The elders exchanged glances, speaking softly among themselves, weighing the rules of their traditions against the unusual circumstances of the rescue. The desert princess had grown up respecting these laws, but she had never been in a situation like this. She watched as the cowboy, who had saved her without hesitation, was treated with a mix of curiosity and caution. He didn't seem to mind the attention. His calm and steady demeanor never wavered, even as the villagers asked questions about his journey, his intentions, and his knowledge of the desert. "He knows the land," she whispered to a friend, "and he cares about it. He cares about me." The words made her smile faintly, though she also felt a little nervous. The elders' discussions hinted that this simple rescue might carry consequences she had never imagined. That evening, she was called to the meeting place at the center of the village. The elders sat in a circle, their faces serious, their eyes sharp with attention. The cowboy followed behind, respecting their space, standing quietly while they spoke. The desert princess explained what had happened during the storm, describing how the wind had almost knocked her off the path, how she had struggled to see, and how the cowboy had arrived just in time to pull her to safety. As she spoke, the villagers nodded, recalling the storm and the dangers that had come with it. She could feel the weight of their eyes, not judging her, but trying to understand the man who had saved her life. The head elder, an older man with deep lines carved into his face from years under the sun, leaned forward. His voice was calm but firm.
In our laws, when someone outside our tribe risks their life to save one of us, it creates a bond of responsibility, he said. The words hung in the air.
The desert princess had heard of this law before, but had never imagined it would apply to her. Responsibility in this sense meant protection, respect, and sometimes more. It was not a law about ownership, not in the way outsiders might think, but it was a law about ensuring that no harm would come to someone who had been placed under the care of another. The cowboy listened carefully. He had never dealt with formal laws like this, but he understood respect and trust, and he also understood responsibility. He looked at the desert princess, whose eyes were wide, filled with both fear and curiosity. He gave her a small nod, signaling that he would follow the customs of her people, even if it was unfamiliar. He wanted her to know that he respected the laws and that he would honor them. "I will do what is needed to protect her," he said quietly, his voice steady. The elders exchanged looks again, weighing his words and the sincerity in his tone. Over the next few days, the cowboy stayed close to the desert princess, helping her with chores, carrying supplies, and guiding her through the rocky paths that surrounded the village. She noticed small details about him every day. The careful way he walked so as not to disturb the sand too much, the way he offered food first to the elders before taking it himself, the way he spoke with a quiet respect to everyone he met. The villagers began to accept him more, recognizing that he was not just a stranger passing through. He was someone who had risked his life for their own, and now he was showing that he understood their ways. Despite the growing trust, the desert princess could feel the tension in the air. The villagers were polite, even friendly, but there were questions in their eyes. Why did he come here, some wondered. Does he understand what this law means? Others whispered that perhaps this rescue was not random, that maybe there was more to this cowboy than met the eye. She felt their curiosity too, but she also felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had saved her life, and now he was learning the ways of her people, not out of obligation, but out of respect. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and red, the elders called another meeting. This time the discussion was more serious. The head elder spoke slowly, choosing words carefully. "This law is not meant to limit freedom," he said, "but to create a bond. When one risks life for another, it is a promise. The promise is to protect, guide, and care. The person saved is under the responsibility of the rescuer, as long as trust and respect are maintained." The desert princess listened closely, realizing that the law was not about ownership in the way outsiders might think, but about honor, duty, and safety. The cowboy absorbed every word. He understood the meaning behind the law, even if it was different from anything he had known before. It was not a trap, nor a demand for obedience. It was a recognition of courage and sacrifice. He looked at the desert princess, realizing that he was now part of a bond that went beyond a single rescue. He was responsible for her safety, and he took that responsibility seriously. She felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The law meant she could rely on him, but it also reminded her that her life had changed forever, that she could not face the desert alone as she once had. In the following days, they spent more time together, walking the desert paths, checking water sources, and learning from one another. She taught him how to find hidden springs, how to recognize signs of approaching storms, and how to listen to the subtle changes in wind and temperature. He taught her ways to move more safely across the sand, how to read the tracks of animals, and how to carry supplies more efficiently. Together, they became a team, each learning from the other, each growing more aware of the desert's dangers and its beauty. The villagers watched them, noticing how naturally they worked together, how their trust seemed to grow stronger with every passing day. One afternoon, they came across a small herd of deer near a water source. The desert princess was about to approach, but the cowboy stopped her with a gentle hand.
"Let them be," he whispered. "The desert gives life, but it also has rules. We can watch, but we must respect them."
She nodded, seeing the wisdom in his words. That moment, simple as it was, reminded her of the deeper meaning behind the bond created by the law.
Protection was not only about people, it was about respecting the desert, its creatures, and the balance of life within it. As the sun set each day, they would sit together and share stories of their lives.
She told him about her childhood, about learning to survive when the desert was harsh, and about the elders who had guided her. He shared stories of his own life, of long journeys across deserts and plains. Through these stories, a deeper understanding grew between them. It was no longer just a matter of rescue and law. It was a connection formed by shared experience, respect, and care. However, challenges still arose. Travelers passing through would occasionally question the cowboy's presence, wondering if he truly understood the customs of the village. The desert princess sometimes felt the tension, noticing the skeptical glances and quiet murmurs, but she also felt a growing sense of confidence, knowing that he would always act with honor and respect. Together they faced each situation, showing patience and calm, proving that courage and integrity were more important than words or doubts. One evening, as a cool desert breeze swept through the village, the elders gathered once more. They spoke quietly, discussing how the bond created by the law could be maintained and honored. They emphasized that it was a matter of trust, mutual respect, and responsibility. The desert princess listened, feeling the weight of tradition and the importance of honoring those who had risked everything for her safety. She also looked at the cowboy, who met her gaze with steady eyes, showing her that he understood the meaning of this law not as a rule, but as a promise. By the end of the second week, a routine had formed. The desert princess and the cowboy moved together through the village and surrounding desert, learning, helping, and growing closer through shared experiences. She began to see that his actions were motivated not by obligation alone, but by genuine care. The villagers, too, began to recognize his sincerity, seeing that he was not a stranger who had come and left, but someone who had become part of their lives, part of the desert's story. Through every step of this journey, the desert princess realized something important. The desert was harsh and unpredictable, but it was also full of lessons about trust, courage, and respect. The cowboy had not only saved her life, but had become a teacher, a protector, and a companion. And while Apache law had given structure to their bond, the real connection was built on choices, actions, and hearts willing to understand one another. By the time the sun dipped behind the mountains one evening, painting the sky with deep purples and oranges, the desert princess and the cowboy stood together, looking out over the sand. The desert stretched endlessly, full of hidden dangers and hidden beauty. She turned to him and smiled, a smile full of gratitude, trust, and recognition of the bond that had formed between them. He tipped his hat and nodded, knowing that their story had only just begun, and that the desert in all its harshness and wonder would shape them both in ways neither could have imagined. The days passed in a steady rhythm, with the desert princess and the cowboy moving carefully through the village and surrounding desert. They were growing closer, their trust and understanding deepening with each shared experience. Yet, despite the calm of daily life, an air of anticipation lingered. The villagers whispered quietly among themselves, and the elders met in the evenings, speaking softly in hushed tones. The storm had passed, but its aftermath was not yet settled. What had started as a rescue now carried implications far larger than either the cowboy or the desert princess had imagined. One morning, the head elder called for a gathering at the center of the village. The villagers assembled quietly, forming a wide circle, with the desert princess standing near the middle and the cowboy just behind her.
Everyone was aware of the importance of this meeting. The elders' decision would determine how the law applied to the rescue, and it would shape the bond between the two.
The desert princess felt her heart beat faster. She had expected gratitude, perhaps admiration for the cowboy's bravery, but now she understood that this was something deeper, something that involved rules and traditions older than anyone in the village could remember.
The head elder spoke first, his voice low but firm. "The desert has tested you, "And you have survived," he said, addressing the desert princess. But survival is not only about skill and courage, it is about trust, respect, and the bonds we form when one risks life for another. This is a law that has guided our people for generations. It is not a law of ownership in the sense outsiders might think. It is a law of duty and protection. His eyes swept across the gathered villagers, then focused on the cowboy. "You have risked your life to save one of us. That act cannot be ignored. According to our traditions, a bond is formed, a responsibility that cannot be taken lightly." The cowboy listened silently, letting the words sink in. He had always understood responsibility in his own way through his life on the open plains and deserts, but this was different. This was a formal acknowledgement of duty, recognized not just by the people around him, but by generations of law and custom. He felt a weight settle on his shoulders, heavy but not oppressive. He knew he could not ignore this responsibility, and he also knew he could not leave it to chance. "I understand," he said finally, his voice steady. "I will do what is required to protect her, to honor your traditions, and to respect your laws." The elders nodded slowly, satisfied that his words were sincere. The desert princess watched him carefully. She could see the seriousness in his eyes, the quiet strength and determination. It was comforting, in a way, knowing that he was aware of the responsibility placed upon him. At the same time, she felt a ripple of anxiety. This law, which was meant to protect her, also reminded her that her life had changed forever. She could not face the desert alone as she once had. She would always have someone watching her back, someone she would have to rely on, even if it went against her independent nature. But she also felt trust, knowing that this man had proven his courage and his care, not just in words but in action. The elders continued to explain the law, emphasizing that it was meant to create a bond of mutual respect and protection. "This law ensures that no harm comes to those who are saved," one elder said. "It places the responsibility on the rescuer to guide, protect, and support. This bond is not taken lightly, and it is recognized by all who live within the desert and follow our ways." They spoke of past examples, of travelers who had been rescued, and the agreements that had formed as a result. Each story reinforced the importance of responsibility, honor, and careful action. As the elders spoke, the villagers listened closely. Some of them nodded in approval, seeing the wisdom in the law, while others looked thoughtful, wondering what this bond would mean for the desert princess and the cowboy in the days to come. She could feel the eyes of the community on her, measuring her reactions, seeing how she would respond to this unexpected turn of events. She looked at the cowboy, searching for reassurance. He met her gaze with calm, steady eyes, and she understood that he was fully aware of the commitment before him. In the following days, the cowboy began to take on a more active role in the desert princess's life. He guided her through the desert, helping her navigate the difficult paths and teaching her new skills that would keep her safe. He shared his knowledge of tracking animals, finding water, and reading the signs of the weather. He was patient and careful, never pushing her beyond what she could manage, but always offering guidance and protection. The desert princess in turn shared her own expertise, showing him hidden springs, safe routes, and secret places where food could be gathered. Together they formed a partnership, each learning from the other, each growing stronger and more confident. Despite this growing bond, challenges arose. Travelers passing through the area sometimes questioned the cowboy's presence, wondering if he truly understood the customs and the laws. Some villagers whispered doubts, concerned that he might not respect the traditions fully. The desert princess felt the tension as well, noticing the skeptical glances and quiet murmurs, but each time the cowboy responded with patience and respect, demonstrating through his actions that he understood the weight of his responsibility. His calm demeanor and careful attention gradually won over even the most doubtful villagers. One afternoon, a small group of traders arrived at the village. They were unfamiliar with the customs and had no understanding of the law that now governed the bond between the cowboy and the desert princess. They questioned his presence, asking why he stayed in the village and what right he had to accompany her. The elders intervened calmly, explaining the law and the bond that had been formed through the rescue. The traders listened, impressed by the clarity and fairness of the tradition.
They realized that this was not a matter of ownership, as outsiders might assume, but of respect, responsibility, and protection. As the days went on, the desert princess began to see the deeper meaning of the law. It was not a restriction on her freedom. It was a shield. It meant that she had someone who would always ensure her safety, someone who would guide her through danger and teach her skills she had not yet learned. The cowboy's presence was no longer just comforting. It was empowering. She felt a sense of security that allowed her to explore the desert with confidence, knowing that she was not alone. At the same time, she respected the responsibility he bore, understanding that his life had changed just as much as hers. The cowboy himself felt the shift in his own life. He had always been independent, traveling alone and relying only on his own skills. Now he carried a responsibility that was both challenging and rewarding. He was accountable for another life, someone whose safety depended on his actions and decisions. But he welcomed the challenge, understanding that true courage was not just about facing danger. It was about commitment, care, and honor. He was learning not only about the desert, but also about the deep sense of duty that came with the traditions of the desert princess's people. One evening, as the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of red and orange, the desert princess and the cowboy sat together outside the village. The wind was calm and the sand glowed softly in the fading light. She turned to him, her eyes thoughtful. "I never imagined that a single moment could change so much," she said quietly. He nodded, understanding perfectly. "One choice, one action can alter the path of many lives," he replied. "But it's what we do with that moment that matters. And we have to make sure we honor it." That night, the village settled into quiet, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. The desert princess reflected on the law and the bond it had created. She realized that this connection was not just about her safety. It was about trust, respect, and the shared responsibility of living in a harsh and unforgiving land. She had learned that courage was not just a personal trait, but a quality that grew through actions and commitments to others. She looked at the cowboy who was sitting nearby, tending to his horse, and felt a deep sense of gratitude and respect. The following morning, they continued their work together. The cowboy taught her more advanced survival skills, including how to identify the subtle signs of a coming storm, how to avoid dangerous animals, and how to read the desert's natural indicators for water and shelter. She listened carefully, absorbing every lesson, and applied them immediately. The villagers watched, impressed by the partnership that had formed. It was not just about law or duty, it was about cooperation, mutual respect, and the growth of both individuals through shared experience. Throughout this period, the bond between the desert princess and the cowboy grew stronger. They shared quiet moments of conversation, laughter, and reflection. They faced small dangers together, each challenge reinforcing the connection between them. The law had created the initial framework, but it was their actions, their choices, and their respect for one another that made the bond real and lasting. The villagers began to see this clearly, understanding that the cowboy was no longer a stranger, but a trusted part of their community. By the end of Part 3, the reality of the bond was fully recognized. The cowboy had accepted his responsibility. The desert princess had embraced the protection and guidance offered, and the village had acknowledged the importance of the law and the courage it celebrated. The story of the rescue had grown into a story of trust, respect, and mutual understanding, a story that would guide them in the desert for the days to come. The desert was waking slowly, the first light of dawn brushing the sand in soft shades of pink and gold. The village was quiet except for the sound of small animals moving among the rocks and the distant calls of birds. The desert princess stepped outside her home, feeling the coolness of the morning air against her skin. She carried a small water pouch and a satchel with herbs and dried food she had gathered the day before. Today was another day to learn. Another day to prepare for life in the desert that could change in an instant. The cowboy was already waiting near the edge of the village, his horse tied to a sturdy post. He had been checking the paths leading out from the village, making sure there were no hidden dangers, no animals or unstable ground that could cause trouble. He looked up as she approached and gave a small nod. "Ready for today?" he asked. She smiled and adjusted her satchel. "I'm ready," she said. though her heart beat faster. She had grown accustomed to his guidance, but every day in the desert carried new challenges. Their first task was to check a small canyon nearby, a place the desert princess knew could be tricky if the wind shifted or if the sun became too hot too quickly. As they walked together, he explained the subtle changes in the sand and the rocks.
"See how the wind has moved the sand here?" he asked. "It hides the small dips that could make you stumble or sprain your ankle. Always check before stepping." She nodded, following his instructions carefully.
Every tip he offered was practical, every warning was a lesson, and she realized she was learning faster than ever before. As they moved through the canyon, they encountered tracks of a small animal, possibly a coyote. The desert princess crouched to study the marks in the sand, and the cowboy watched her carefully. "You've learned to read the desert well," he said softly.
"But sometimes what you see is not what it seems. You have to understand what the signs mean, not just notice them."
She looked at him, grateful for his guidance. Together, they followed the tracks for a short distance, noting the direction the animal had gone and how the sand and wind had changed the marks. It was a small lesson, but it reminded her that every detail mattered in the desert. By mid-morning, they reached a hidden spring that the desert princess had discovered long ago. She approached it carefully, ensuring the water was clean, while the cowboy stood nearby, scanning the surrounding area.
"Always be aware of your surroundings," he reminded her. "Water is life in the desert, but it also draws attention. We need to be cautious." She nodded, filling their water pouches and storing some in a small clay container.
As she worked, she noticed how he moved, steady and alert, ready for anything. She realized that his presence was not just protective, it was calming. His experience gave her confidence she hadn't felt before. When they returned to the village, the villagers were already out, going about their daily routines. Some paused to watch the pair approach, whispering quietly among themselves.
The desert princess could feel their curiosity and approval.
They had seen the cowboy in action, now seeing not just words but deeds, and they recognized that he was more than just a man who had rescued her. He was learning their ways, respecting their customs, and proving that he could be trusted with the responsibility given to him by the law. That afternoon, a sudden commotion arose near the village gates. A wild horse had broken free from a traveling caravan, running dangerously close to homes and livestock. The villagers froze, unsure of what to do. The cowboy reacted immediately, running toward the horse with calm determination. The desert princess followed, ready to help if needed, but trusting his skill. With a few careful movements and a firm voice, he managed to guide the horse away from the village and toward a safe pen. The villagers watched in awe as he worked, recognizing that he was capable, courageous, and fully committed to protecting not just the desert princess but the community as a whole. After the incident, the elders gathered once more to speak with the cowboy.
"You have shown skill, courage, and respect," the head elder said. "Your actions today prove that the bond formed by the law is meaningful, and that trust can grow through deeds, not just words." The cowboy nodded, feeling the weight of their acknowledgement. He understood that earning trust took time, effort, and consistent action. He also knew that his responsibility was ongoing, not a one-time event.
The law had formalized the bond, but it was his choices that would shape how it would last. The desert princess watched quietly, feeling a sense of pride and reassurance. She had feared what the law might mean, worried that her independence would be compromised, but now she saw that it was not about restriction. It was about support, guidance, and a shared responsibility that could strengthen her life in the desert. She realized that this bond allowed her to grow, to explore, and to learn in ways she could not have done alone. She smiled at the cowboy, who returned her glance with quiet confidence, and they continued their work together.
Over the following days, the cowboy continued to prove himself in small but important ways.
He helped repair fences, guided travelers safely through difficult paths, and assisted in gathering supplies from the desert. Each act, though seemingly simple, carried significance. It showed the villagers that he respected their land, their rules, and the trust placed in him. It also allowed the desert princess to see him not just as a protector, but as a partner, someone who shared her challenges, her triumphs, and her daily life.
One morning, a group of traders returned to the village. They had heard of the cowboy's presence and the rescue of the desert princess. Curious, They asked about the law and how it applied. The elders explained, emphasizing that it was a bond of responsibility and trust, not a restriction of freedom. The traders listened carefully, noting the cowboy's respectful demeanor and the desert princess's confidence. They realized that this was not a matter of ownership or control, but of honor, care, and mutual respect. The story spread beyond the village, earning the cowboy admiration for his courage and integrity. Throughout this period, the bond between the desert princess and the cowboy deepened in ways beyond survival. They shared quiet moments watching sunsets, discussing the desert's wildlife, and reflecting on the lessons they had learned. She taught him how to recognize subtle changes in the wind that signaled storms, how to identify plants that could be used for food or medicine, and how to move quietly so as not to disturb the animals. He taught her how to track animals over long distances, how to handle dangerous situations calmly, and how to use tools and supplies more efficiently. Each lesson reinforced trust, respect, and the connection between them. One afternoon, they encountered a sudden flash flood in a narrow canyon. Water poured through the rocks with unexpected speed and force, threatening anyone in its path. The desert princess froze for a moment, unsure of where to go. The cowboy grabbed her hand and led her to higher ground, shouting instructions over the roar of the water. Together, they navigated the dangerous terrain, relying on each other's guidance and skill. When they reached safety, both were soaked but unharmed. The villagers who had seen the event from a distance were amazed at their teamwork, realizing that the cowboy's presence was more than protective. It was transformative, allowing the desert princess to face danger with confidence. Evenings were filled with reflection. The desert princess often sat quietly, thinking about the lessons of the day. She realized that her independence had not been taken away. Instead, it had been strengthened through guidance, support, and shared responsibility. The cowboy had proven that the bond created by the law was not a burden, but a gift. Someone who could teach, protect, and grow alongside her. Their partnership was not defined by obligation alone, but by shared respect, trust, and courage. The villagers began to see this too. They noticed how the cowboy adapted to their ways, how he treated their traditions with respect, and how he worked not for recognition but for the well-being of the desert princess and the community. Parents taught their children about him as an example of courage and honor, and the elders acknowledged that the law's bond had been strengthened through real, meaningful actions. Stories of the rescue, the guidance, and the teamwork spread throughout the desert, reminding everyone that trust and respect were more powerful than fear or doubt. By the end of the fourth part of their story, the bond between the cowboy and the desert princess had grown into something remarkable. It was no longer just a matter of law or tradition. It was a partnership forged through experience, action, and mutual care. They faced challenges together, learned from one another, and earned the respect of the community. The desert, with all its danger and beauty, had shaped them both, teaching lessons of courage, honor, and the power of trust. The sun set one evening, casting long shadows across the sand. The desert princess and the cowboy stood side by side, looking out at the endless desert. She felt a sense of gratitude, confidence, and respect, knowing that she was no longer alone in facing the challenges of her world. He felt a sense of purpose, understanding that his responsibility was real, but also deeply rewarding. Together, they had navigated storms, floods, and uncertainty, and had emerged stronger, more capable, and more connected than ever before. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but they faced it together, ready for whatever the future might bring. The desert was quiet in the early morning, the sky a soft blue with streaks of pink along the horizon. The desert princess stepped outside, feeling the cool breeze against her skin. Today felt different. She had spent weeks learning, exploring, and growing alongside the cowboy. The bond between them had strengthened with every shared experience, every lesson, and every challenge. She realized that what had started as a rescue had turned into a partnership, a connection built on trust, respect, and courage. The cowboy was already at the edge of the village, checking the supplies and making sure everything was secure. He had become a familiar presence to the villagers, someone who had proven through action that he understood their laws, respected their customs, and could be trusted with responsibility. As the desert princess approached, he gave a small nod, his eyes meeting hers with calm assurance. They had shared so much, yet each day brought a new lesson, a new challenge,
and a deeper understanding of one another. That morning, the elders had called a meeting. The desert princess and the cowboy entered the circle, aware that the discussions would be important. The head elder spoke first, his voice steady and thoughtful. "The bond created by our law has been tested," he said. "Through courage, respect, and action, it has proven itself to be more than words. Both of you have shown understanding and responsibility. The law's purpose is fulfilled when trust is honored, protection is given, and respect guides every choice." The cowboy listened quietly, understanding fully what the elder meant. He had accepted responsibility from the moment he rescued the desert princess, but now the acknowledgement of the community confirmed that his actions had meaning beyond himself. He was part of something larger, a law and a tradition that valued courage, honor, and protection. He looked at the desert princess and saw the relief and confidence in her eyes. She had grown through their shared experiences, and the law that had initially seemed like a rule now felt like a promise fulfilled. The villagers watched silently, their attention focused on the pair. They had observed the cowboy's patience, his skill, and his respect for the customs of the land. They had seen how he guided the desert princess safely through the desert, how he helped protect the village, and how he worked tirelessly without complaint or desire for recognition. In their eyes, he had become not just a rescuer, but a trusted partner and a symbol of courage and honor. Over the following days, life in the desert continued as usual, but with a new sense of balance. The desert princess and the cowboy worked side by side, exploring the desert, teaching one another, and sharing the knowledge they had gained. She showed him the hidden springs and secret paths, while he taught her advanced tracking, safety techniques, and ways to read the desert's signs more accurately. Each day reinforced their connection, and both began to realize that the law had created a bond that went beyond formal responsibility. It had nurtured trust, companionship, and mutual respect. One afternoon, while checking a distant water source, they noticed a small group of travelers struggling in the heat. The sun was high, and the sand shimmered with intense heat waves. Without hesitation, the cowboy guided the travelers to safety, showing them the hidden paths and ensuring they had enough water to continue their journey. The desert princess assisted, offering herbs and shade, and together they demonstrated that the bond between them was practical as well as meaningful. The villagers who watched from a distance were reminded once again that courage, action, and care were the true tests of responsibility. As days turned into weeks, the desert princess and the cowboy faced more challenges, from sudden storms to unpredictable desert wildlife. Each challenge reinforced their partnership and their respect for one another. They learned to anticipate dangers, to move carefully through the harsh terrain, and to rely on one another's knowledge and judgment. The bond that had started with a single act of bravery had grown into a partnership built on experience, trust, and the shared understanding of life in the desert. Evenings were filled with quiet reflection. They would sit together on a rocky ledge, watching the sun set behind distant mountains. The desert princess often spoke of her fears, her hopes, and her dreams, while the cowboy shared his own experiences and lessons learned from a lifetime of travel and survival. These conversations strengthened their bond further, creating a connection that was personal as well as protective. It was clear that the law had created the framework, but their choices, respect, and actions had given it life. One evening, they encountered a small band of lost travelers, children among them, who had wandered away from a caravan. The cowboy acted immediately, guiding them back to safety while the desert princess comforted the children and reassured them. The villagers witnessed this act and felt a sense of pride in the pair. The cowboy was not only protecting the desert princess but extending his care and skill to anyone in need, showing that the bond created by the law could inspire courage and trust beyond a single life. The desert princess, reflecting on the months that had passed, realized how much she had grown. Her independence was not diminished. It had been strengthened by the guidance and partnership of the cowboy. She had learned new skills, gained confidence, and come to understand the deeper meaning of the laws of her people. The cowboy had become more than a protector. He was a partner, a teacher, and a friend. Together, they had faced storms, floods, wild animals, and countless challenges, emerging stronger and more capable. The elders continued to observe their actions, offering quiet guidance and acknowledgement. They saw that the law's purpose had been fulfilled. The bond had created trust, ensured safety, and strengthened the community. It was no longer just a rule, it had become a living example of respect, courage, and honor.
The Desert Princess and the Cowboy had transformed the law into something meaningful, showing that responsibility could coexist with freedom, care could coexist with independence, and protection could coexist with trust.
By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the Desert Princess and the Cowboy stood together, looking out over the vast expanse of sand and rock.
She felt a sense of gratitude and peace, knowing that the desert was no longer a place of fear but of learning, growth, and shared experience.
He felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment, understanding that the responsibility he had accepted had become a bond of trust, honor, and mutual respect. Their story, once defined by a single act of rescue, had evolved into a journey of partnership, learning, and courage.
The desert had tested them, shaped them, and taught them the value of trust, responsibility, and honor.
The villagers recognized this as well, seeing in their actions the living proof of the law's power to create meaningful bonds and to guide people through the challenges of life in a harsh and beautiful landscape. As night fell, stars began to appear in the vast desert sky.
The Desert Princess and the Cowboy sat quietly, listening to the soft sounds of the desert night, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of small animals, the whisper of the wind across the sand. They knew that the desert would continue to challenge them, but they also knew that together they could face whatever came their way. The bond created by the law, strengthened through action, respect, and trust, had become unbreakable. In the weeks and months that followed, the Cowboy remained by the Desert Princess's side. They explored the desert, helped travelers, taught one another new skills, and faced challenges together. Their partnership inspired others, showing that courage, care, and respect could create bonds stronger than fear, stronger than isolation, and stronger than any storm the desert could send. The law that had first guided their actions had grown into a living relationship, full of learning, protection, and shared experience, and so the Cowboy and the Desert Princess continued their journey side by side. The desert, once a place of danger and uncertainty, had become a landscape of opportunity, growth, and connection. Through trust, courage, and honor, they had transformed the bond created by the law into something enduring and meaningful.